Okay, so picture the most mundane object in your refrigerator right now.
Probably sitting way in the back of the crisper drawer, right?
Exactly. It's bright orange. It's probably the very first vegetable you ever actually ate as a toddler.
And definitely the go-to prop for a certain famous cartoon rabbit.
Right, the humble carrot. It is just the absolute definition of ubiquitous. I mean, if I asked you listening right now why you eat carrots, you'd probably say, well, I know exactly what you'd say.
Vitamin A.
Yep. Or, they help you see in the dark,
Yeah, the classic Bugs Bunny defense.
which is great.
Yeah.
And usually that is exactly where the conversation ends for most people.
But not today.
Definitely not today.
Yeah.
Because looking at this massive stack of research we brought for this deep dive, I mean, we're talking huge prospective cohorts, complex bioavailability, biochemistry, and some honestly terrifying safety trials. The story of the carrot is just not simple at all.
No, it really isn't. It's arguably one of the most complex, high-stakes puzzles in modern nutrition science, which sounds dramatic for a root vegetable, but it's true.
It does sound dramatic, but it's totally justified
Yeah.
because it presents us with this genuine biological paradox.
Right.
On one hand, you have robust data showing that eating this vegetable is linked to slashing cancer rates. We're talking lung and colorectal cancer. But on the other hand,
And this is the scary part.
yeah, we have these rigorous billion-dollar clinical trials showing that if you try to extract the quote-unquote good part of a carrot and just put it in a pill, it can actually kill you.
That is the famous smoker's paradox. And we are absolutely going to get deep into that today because it completely upended how the medical community thinks about supplements.
But even just on a practical, everyday level for you listening at home, this research suggests we have basically been eating carrots wrong this whole time.
Yeah, there is a real central tension here because the way you eat a carrot to prevent cancer is the exact opposite of how you eat a carrot to boost your vision or your immune system.
It's a total trade-off.
Exactly. Depending on whether you crunch it raw or boil it or roast it in oil, you are essentially prioritizing one set of biological weapons while completely disarming another.
So the mission of this deep dive isn't just a generic, hey, eat your veggies lecture.
No, we want to decode the actual chemistry here so you can get the specific benefits the science promises.
Okay, so let's jump right into the evidence. And to be clear, we aren't looking at small, 30-person anecdotes here. We are looking at the Danish Diet Cancer and Health cohort, which tracked over 55,000 people.
Huge data set.
We have the AGBC and CARET trials. So let's start with the heavy hitter, which is cancer prevention. Because the signal in the data here is surprisingly loud.
It is incredibly loud. When you look at the recent systematic reviews covering this, you see a really consistent pattern. We're looking at roughly a 10 to 20% reduction in overall cancer risk associated with consistent carrot intake.
Wow.
And when you drill down into specific cancers, particularly lung and colorectal cancer, the correlation is even tighter.
Now, I always try to play devil's advocate with these big observational studies. Because, isn't this just the classic healthy user bias?
Right, the idea that people who eat carrots also do yoga and don't smoke.
Exactly. They go for a jog. They visit their doctor regularly.
Yeah.
How do we know it's actually the carrot doing the heavy lifting?
That is always the main confounding factor in nutritional epidemiology. But the researchers control for that. They adjust the models for smoking status, body mass index, alcohol intake, exercise. And even after stripping all those variables away, the signal remains.
But the real smoking gun, the thing that proves it's the carrot, comes from the dose-response relationship in that huge Danish cohort, right?
Yes. They didn't just ask people, hey, do you eat carrots? They looked at exactly how much they were eating, and they found a fascinating inflection point.
And the number is surprisingly low.
It is. Eating just 32 grams of raw carrot per day was associated with a significant reduction in lung cancer risk compared to people who ate none.
32 grams. I was trying to visualize that earlier. That is really not a lot of food.
It's tiny. It's roughly half of a standard medium-sized carrot, or maybe 4 or 5 of those little baby carrots.
So you really don't need to be gnawing on a root all day long.
Not at all. But here is the massive catch, and this is the first real twist in our story. In that Danish study, this specific protection against lung cancer was driven almost entirely by raw carrot intake.
No, it has to be raw.
Right. When they isolated the data for cooked carrots in this specific context, the signal for cancer protection basically faded away.
Okay, so this brings us right to the mechanism. Because growing up, the whole story was beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is the superstar antioxidant. It's the hero of the carrot.
That was the assumption for decades.
But if I remember correctly, cooking actually helps release beta-carotene, which I know we'll get into later. But logically, if raw is better for cancer prevention, it implies that beta-carotene isn't actually the main character in the cancer story.
Precisely. You hit the nail on the head. We spent years thinking beta-carotene was the ultimate cancer fighter. But researchers are now pointing to a completely different class of compounds inside the carrot.
And these are the polyacetylenes.
Yes. Specifically, two absolute tongue twisters called falcarinol and falcarindiol.
Alpha-carotene. Sounds kind of industrial, like a cleaning product.
Well, it's actually a form of chemical warfare.
Wait, excuse me.
Think about a carrot's life from the plant's perspective. It's a fleshy root sitting in damp, dark soil. That soil is packed with fungi, bacteria, nematodes, insects.
And it obviously can't just run away.
Exactly. So it has to defend itself chemically. It produces these polyacetylenes as a natural pesticide to kill off fungal infections and deter pests from eating it. It's literally the plant's immune system.
Okay, so when we eat a raw carrot, we are basically ingesting the carrot's own biological defense mechanism.
That's exactly what's happening. And it turns out the same chemical that kills a fungus on a root has profound biological effects on human cells.
How so?
Well, falcarinol is highly bioactive. Mechanistically, in the human body, it acts a lot like aspirin. It inhibits COX enzymes, which are major drivers of systemic inflammation.
Oh, wow.
And in preclinical models, these exact polyacetylenes have been shown to directly inhibit tumor growth. They essentially interact with the cell cycle and tell cancer cells to stop dividing.
That is incredible. But this totally explains the raw requirement from the data,
Yes, because polyacetylenes are what chemists call heat labile.
meaning they break down under heat.
Right. They are chemically unstable when exposed to high temperatures. So if you take that carrot and boil it for 20 minutes or roast it until it's nice and soft and caramelized,
You're thermally degrading those specific
you're
compounds.
completely disarming the weapon.
So if my primary goal is cancer prevention, specifically lung and colorectal protection, and I'm eating soft, mushy carrots in a beef stew, I'm basically failing.
For that specific goal, yes, you're getting other great nutrients, but you are not getting that specific anti-cancer armor. For falcarinol, the crunch is completely non-negotiable.
Okay, so step one of our protocol is crystal clear. Eat raw carrots. Case closed. But we have to talk about the other side of the coin now.
Vitamin A side.
Right. Because if you listening just decide, great, I'll only eat raw carrots from now on, you're actually missing out on the thing carrots are most famous for.
You're missing out on almost all of it. And this perfectly transitions us into the smoker's paradox, which I honestly think is the most dramatic cautionary tale in the history of public health.
It really is. It perfectly explained why we can't just take a scientific shortcut and pop a pill.
So let's set the scene. It's the 1990s. Beta-carotene is the absolute golden child of the wellness world.
It was everywhere. The superstar antioxidant.
It was. And the logic at the time seemed totally flawless. Scientists looked at the early observational data we just discussed. People who eat lots of carrots have way less lung cancer. Carrots are absolutely loaded with beta-carotene. Therefore, beta-carotene must be the thing preventing the lung cancer.
A equals B, B equals C. It makes sense on paper.
Right. So public health officials and researchers thought, let's save the people who are most at risk. Let's give massive therapeutic doses of beta-carotene to heavy smokers to protect their lungs.
And this was the premise of the ATBC and carrot trials. And we should emphasize, these were not small, low-budget studies. These were massive, incredibly expensive, gold standard, randomized controlled trials.
Huge. They recruited tens of thousands of participants, mostly long-term heavy smokers and asbestos workers, and they gave them daily supplements containing about 20 to 30 milligrams of pure beta-carotene.
Just for context, how much is that compared to eating a normal carrot?
Well, a medium whole carrot has maybe 4 or 5 milligrams of beta-carotene, so they were giving these people a pharmacological dose 4 to 6 times what you would reasonably get from food every single day.
And they were expecting to just watch lung cancer rates absolutely plummet.
They were ready to announce a miracle cure. They really thought they had solved it.
But instead, they actually had to halt the trials early.
Yes, because the people taking the pills were dying.
It still sends chills down my spine to hear that.
It's staggering. In the ATBC trial, the group taking the beta-carotene supplements had an 18% higher incidence of lung cancer.
18% higher.
And in the carrot trial, it was even worse. They saw a 28% increase in lung cancer compared to the placebo group.
I mean, you give someone a pill that's specifically designed to prevent cancer, and it actually accelerates it. How is that biochemically possible? How does an antioxidant, which by definition is supposed to protect your cells, become a weapon against them?
This is the core of the paradox, and the leading scientific consensus now is that the biological environment dictates the chemical behavior of the molecule.
Okay, unpack that for us.
So, in a healthy, low-stress cellular environment, beta-carotene neutralizes free radicals. It acts like a firefighter putting out little cellular fires.
Right, doing its normal job.
But the lungs of a heavy smoker are a completely different environment. They are under immense chronic oxidative stress. The cellular atmosphere is literally chemically on fire.
So you throw pure beta-carotene into that raging fire.
And instead of putting it out, the molecule itself breaks down. It physically oxidizes. It flips from being an antioxidant to a pro-oxidant.
Oh, wow.
It effectively pours gasoline on the fire. It creates oxidized byproducts that actively attack the cellular DNA and accelerate the tumor growth it was supposed to stop.
But, and this is the absolute crucial distinction that saves the carrot's reputation here, if a heavy smoker eats a whole carrot, this disastrous chain reaction doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. In fact, the observational data clearly shows that smokers who eat whole natural carrots still see a protective anti-cancer benefit.
So the food itself is safe.
Yeah.
The isolated chemical is deadly.
Exactly. And it all comes down to the concept of the food matrix.
The matrix.
Right. A carrot is not just a biological delivery vehicle for beta-carotene. It is an incredibly complex three-dimensional structure. It contains fiber, vitamin C, hundreds of other trace phytochemicals, and of course, those polyacetylines we talked about earlier.
All working together.
Yes. This entire matrix buffers the absorption process. It slows down the release of the compounds into your bloodstream. It provides a whole suite of cofactors that keep the beta-carotene chemically stable. When you isolate the one molecule in a lab and megadose it, you strip away every single one of those natural safeguards.
Nature basically engineered a built-in safety mechanism that human arrogance just stripped away because we wanted a shortcut.
That is the perfect way to put it. We thought we were smarter than millions of years of plant evolution, and we very clearly weren't.
Okay, so that is a terrifying but incredibly necessary warning for anyone listening. If you smoke or have a history of heavy smoking, absolutely no beta-carotene supplements, period.
None.
But for the rest of us, we do still want vitamin A. It's crucial for our immune system, our skin, and yes, our vision. But you mentioned earlier that raw carrots are actually terrible at delivering vitamin A. Why is that? Is it locked away inside the plant?
It is literally locked in a microscopic safe. Carrots have incredibly tough, rigid cellular walls made out of pectin and cellulose. And unlike some other plant compounds, beta-carotene is crystalline.
Crystalline, like a crystal.
Yes, it's physically trapped inside these microscopic, hard crystal structures deep within the plant cell.
So when I sit there chewing on a raw carrot, I'm not breaking those walls down.
Nowhere near enough. You're chewing, you're swallowing, and your stomach acid goes to work on it. But on a microscopic level, a huge percentage of those plant cells just stay totally intact.
They just survive the stomach acid.
They pass right through your entire digestive tract and exit the other side, taking all that precious beta-carotene right along with them.
We have actual numbers on this inefficiency, right? How much do we actually absorb from a raw carrot?
The bioavailability studies are pretty humbling. From a totally raw carrot, you are absorbing maybe 11 to 15% of the available beta-carotene.
15%. That is wildly inefficient for us.
Well, it's very efficient for the plant. The plant wants to keep its nutrients. But we can absolutely hack the system. We can break open the safe.
And the lockpick is heat.
Heat and mechanical force. Steaming, boiling, or roasting physically softens and breaks down those rigid pectin walls. Pureeing or blending is even better because it mechanically ruptures the cells.
But there is a second key to this lock, right? And honestly, this is the step I think most people completely miss. You cannot just boil some carrots in water and call it a day. You absolutely need fat.
Because vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin.
Right.
It's hydrophobic. It chemically hates water.
Yeah.
If you eat a bowl of plain steamed carrots with absolutely no butter or oil, the beta-carotene gets released from the plant cell, sure, but then it just clumps together in your watery gut and doesn't get absorbed into your body.
So what does the fat actually do?
You need dietary fat like olive oil, avocado, butter, or full-fat yogurt to create these things called micelles in your digestive tract. Think of micelles as little biological taxicabs. They safely shuttle the fat-soluble beta-carotene across the watery intestinal wall and directly into your bloodstream.
So the classic 90s diet snack, a sad little bag of raw baby carrots with absolutely no dip, is basically a total waste of time if your goal is vitamin A.
It's a complete nutritional failure on that front. The clinical data shows that if you cook the carrots thoroughly and add a source of fat, your absorption rate shoots up to 65% or even 75%.
Wow.
That is a 300 to 400% increase in absorption just by changing how you prepare it.
That is a massive difference. So this brings us back to the conflict I mentioned at the very beginning of the deep dive. Heat absolutely destroys the cancer-fighting polyacetylenes.
Right.
But heat and fat are the exact things that unlock the vitamin A.
And that is the true carrot paradox. You fundamentally cannot optimize for both of those benefits in the exact same bite of food.
So what's the actual strategy for people listening? Do we just alternate days, raw Monday, cook Tuesday?
The scientific consensus really points to maintaining what we'd call a mixed portfolio. You literally need to treat raw carrots and cooked carrots as if they are two completely different vegetables with different purposes.
Okay, I like that framework.
So the protocol is eat raw carrots specifically as a snack. Aim for that Danish dose of about 32 grams to get your daily falcarinal insurance policy against cellular mutation.
But don't rely on that raw snack for your vitamin A.
Exactly. For your antioxidant and vitamin A status, you want to intentionally have roasted carrots dripping in olive oil, or a hot blended carrot soup with some heavy cream, or even fresh carrot juice paired with a handful of fatty walnuts.
So you really need both. It's not an either-or situation. It's strictly a both-and strategy.
Precisely. Diversity in your kitchen preparation leads directly to diversity in your biological nutrition.
And speaking of diversity, we should probably talk about color for a minute.
Yeah.
Because we're all so used to the standard bright orange carrot. But if you go to a good farmer's market or a high-end grocery store now, you see purple carrots, yellow ones, white ones.
Yeah, the rainbow buncher.
Are those just for culinary show, or is there a real difference? I always assumed they were just trendy heirloom varieties that tasted exactly the same.
Oh, they are genetically distinct, and they offer a completely different chemical profile. The orange carrot is basically a beta-carotene bomb. And fun fact, that orange color is actually a relatively recent genetic mutation cultivated by humans in the 16th century.
Really? So what do they look like before?
Mostly purple and yellow. Purple carrots are closer to the ancient ancestors, and they get that deep, dark purple color from compounds called anthocyanins.
Wait, anthocyanins, that's the exact same compound that makes blueberries a superfood, right?
Yes, exactly the same. And anthocyanins are incredibly powerful antioxidants in their own right, but they work totally differently in the body than beta-carotene does. They are strongly linked in the literature to improved metabolic health, reduced systemic inflammation, and even protecting your cardiovascular system. So if you eat a purple carrot, you're essentially getting a blueberry-style benefit profile, but packaged in a crunchy root vegetable.
That's amazing. And what about the yellow ones?
Yellow is absolutely fascinating, particularly for eye health.
But I thought orange was for eyes.
Orange helps with night blindness via vitamin A. But yellow carrots are incredibly rich in a completely different compound called lutein.
Lutein, that's the heavy hitter usually associated with preventing age-related macular degeneration.
Exactly. The famous ARARDS 2 trial, which is basically the landmark gold standard study on macular degeneration, identified lutein and zeaxanthin as absolutely critical for slowing down the progression of that disease.
And usually doctors just tell people to eat massive bowls of spinach or kale to get their lutein.
Right, leafy greens are the standard advice. But yellow carrots are a remarkably fantastic, highly bioavailable source. So if you're listening and you have a family history of macular degeneration, you should actively be hunting down the yellow carrots at the store.
It's just wild that different colors of the exact same vegetable act like highly targeted, specific medicines in the body.
It really highlights why the old nutritionist advice to eat the rainbow isn't just a catchy kindergarten slogan. It's literal, hard biochemical advice.
Before we wrap up, I want to quickly touch on the long game here.
Yeah.
We've talked extensively about immediate cancer prevention and eye health, but there's data in the research stack about the heart and the brain too. What's the verdict on those?
For the cardiovascular system, the evidence is moderate but really promising, and it largely comes down to the fiber.
The pectin we mentioned earlier.
Right. In your gut, pectin acts remarkably like a sponge. It physically binds to cholesterol and bile acids in your digestive tract and literally drags them out of your body before they can be reabsorbed.
Nice. Do we have numbers on that effect?
There was a specific trial we looked at where consuming 200 grams of raw carrot per day steadily reduced serum cholesterol by a very significant 11%.
Okay, but 200 grams, that's a lot of carrots to chew through every day. That's like 3 large, full-size carrots.
It is definitely a jaw workout. It's a commitment. But an 11% reduction is clinically comparable to the starting efficacy of some low-dose statin drugs. So the biological effect is very real.
And what other brain data?
This is where patience is absolutely required. The Physicians' Health Study 2 looked at long-term cognitive function, and they found that taking beta-carotene for just a year or two did absolutely nothing for memory or cognitive decline.
0 effects.
0. But in the men who had been consistently taking it for 18 years, there was a highly noticeable preservation of cognitive function. They literally had the brains of significantly younger men compared to the placebo group.
18 years. So this is definitely not some quick fix nootropic. I can't just eat a pound of carrots the night before, a huge math test, and expect to suddenly be a genius.
No, definitely not. It's a lifelong investment. It strongly suggests that maintaining high antioxidant levels over decades physically protects the brain tissue from the slow, dripping rust of oxidative stress. It prevents long-term decline. It doesn't boost your peak intelligence today.
Okay, so pulling all of these threads together, if I'm a listener who just wants to live a longer, healthier life, I should absolutely not just be pushing that sad little carrot garnish to the side of my plate anymore.
Definitely not. It is a genuine dietary powerhouse if you use it correctly.
So let's build out the final deep dive protocol. What are the concrete, actionable steps for our listeners?
Step 1. Embrace the crunch. Aim for that Danish dose, about 32 to 50 grams of raw carrot most days of the week. Basically, 1 medium carrot. Think of this as your daily. Step 2. Respect the fat. When you do cook carrots, and you definitely should, to get the vitamin A and the lutein, you must pair them with lipids. Roast them in oil, dip them in guacamole, eat them alongside a fatty steak. If you eat cooked carrots completely fat-free, you are just flushing the nutrients down the drain.
And step 3.
Step 3 is to seek out variety. If you see purple or yellow carrots at the market, buy them. You are instantly diversifying your internal antioxidant portfolio with anthocyanins and lutein.
And the final, most serious rule we covered.
If you currently smoke, or if you ever smoked heavily in the past, do not take isolated beta-carotene supplements. The clinical data is crystal clear. It is dangerous. Get your nutrients exclusively from the whole food matrix. The carrot is safe, the pill is not.
It really just brings it all back to that idea of the matrix we discussed. We spent the entire last century of medicine trying to outsmart nature by extracting and isolating the active ingredients. We constantly want the magic bullet in a convenient little capsule.
But it turns out the magic isn't actually the isolated molecule. The magic is the messy, incredibly complex physical structure of the whole vegetable itself.
Yeah.
It delivers the natural poison, the phenylketonuol that heals our cells, and the nutrient, the beta-carotene that feeds us. And it does it all in a buffered package that our human bodies have evolved over millions of years to safely process.
It's nature's original, perfectly calibrated drug delivery system.
Exactly. It's vastly smarter than we are.
I absolutely love that. But, it leaves me with a really provocative thought to end on today.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we talked about how phenylketonuol is a stress compound, right? It's a pesticide the plant makes when it's stressed by fungi or pests in the dirt.
Right, it's a defense response.
And we humans evolved to eat those exact plant stress compounds, and they trigger longevity and anti-cancer pathways in our own bodies. It's a biological concept called xenohormesis.
Yes.
So, if modern industrial agriculture is constantly moving toward growing perfect, pristine crops in sterile, indoor hydroponic environments where the plants never experience any stress from pests or fungi, are those plants even producing these life-saving defense chemicals anymore?
Wow, that is a terrifying question.
Right. By making life too perfectly safe for our crops, we might literally be breeding the vital medicine right out of our food supply without even realizing it.
That is something to seriously think about the next time you're at the grocery store.
Exactly. Something for all of you listening to mull over. I'm going to go roast some purple carrots in plenty of olive oil and maybe crunch on a raw orange one while I wait.
Sounds like the absolute perfect protocol.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, eat your colors, and we will catch you on the next one.